Folks, you are just tuning in now for Substack Live. I'm here with straight woman at large, Phoebe Maltz Bovy, a fantastic writer of the book The Last Straight Woman, which I think adds to the gender sexuality discourse in a way that I really, really, really appreciated. Phoebe, you write the Substack. You're just on here on Substack, right? But you write the Substack, the close. Is it close rewatch?
It's close
Read
reading
about
the
Britcoms.
reruns. It's close reading the
Thank you.
reruns. It's mainly Britcoms, but I will close read a Frasier. I will close read a Seinfeld. I'm not difficult about that. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a way in which, like, everyone who likes Britcoms kind of also likes Seinfeld, right? Like
I
there's
think
no
so.
there's no
Yeah.
only Britcom fan.
Only
It's not like
Britcom fans.
sexuality.
I was gonna say there's like OnlyFans and then there's like only Britcom
Only
fans, which
Britcom
is
fans.
that's
Oh
my little
man.
branch of Substack.
I
Yes,
hesitate to think
yes, I
what
love that
Niles's
stuff.
OnlyFans would be like,
Oh my
but
goodness. Very fastidious, or maybe very much the opposite direction. It could be one or the other.
pay me $500 an hour and I will worry at you about
Exactly.
it.
Exactly.
Yes, so I'm sorry, the close watch of the reruns, it's a great Substack, and Phoebe also has a lot of really great just like general weighing in on cultural criticism. You've done such good work on your Substack that I'm excited to talk about more. For those of you who do not know Phoebe yet, she's a cultural critic in Toronto and the author of her first book was called The Perils of Privilege, came out from St. Martin's in 2017. She is a contributing columnist for the Globe and Mail, an opinion editor at the Canadian Jewish News. That's where I found a lot of your work at first, and a co-host with Kat Rosenfield of the Feminine Chaos podcast, whose coverage of the adult braces situation I thought was absolutely fantastic. Her newsletter, we just discussed, is close reading the reruns. She's written for The Atlantic, The Florida, The New Republic, and has a PhD in French from New York University. Phoebe, just to kick it off, what inspired you to write this book, to weigh in thusly?
Um, I feel like I was about to start weighing in on what inspired the cover, which I didn't
Oh yeah.
design, but that's Kate Sinclair designed it. But I'll just say that the cover, a lot of people think, understandably, is the lady who wrote it, right? Or some sort of image of.
Yeah.
It's a little bit more abstract than that. It's inspired indirectly by a photograph that Amy Klobuchar posted to Twitter, where she was at the Minnesota State Fair, flanked by some rather strapping firemen and being kind of understated but appreciative. So that's the
Oh.
cover. It's not me, it's Amy Klobuchar. If you are Amy Klobuchar, it's not you, Amy Klobuchar. It's just, it's abstract. There are several layers of remove. But what inspired me to
Yeah.
write the book was just this kind of long-standing sense from many discourse eras ago that straight women are weird about it. I am a
Mm.
straight woman, as is obviously clear from the whole context. But I would just, at first, what I would see is just sort of a lot of hand wringing, a lot of, oh, to be a straight woman means to want a husband, to want a white wedding dress, all of this. But I'm different from the other straight women, not me, Phoebe, but like me. Sorry, it's just that battery is low. I might have to take out a headphone.
No worries.
But basically, that people would assume that straight womanhood is being passive, is being
Right.
conventional,
Right.
is having no inner life. And to show that they were different from the other straight women, certain straight women would be like emphasizing whatever sort of trappings they were rejecting, whether it's name change at marriage or whatever, and they would make a big thing of it. And then the discourse itself started to change and become
Hmm.
more about women who were, by all accounts, straight would sometimes say they either weren't women or weren't
Right.
straight. That is, on the whole, pretty niche if you're looking
Yeah.
like population wise. What was less niche, and it had been the case, it's sort of switching back a bit, was a large number of young women started identifying as bisexual. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, a certain number of young and old women and men of all ages are bisexual. That's not some sort of,
Yeah.
phantom thing. but definitions of sexuality and how people define these things obviously change over time. And it started to seem like there was just this large number of people who seemed to be straight women and who people behind sort of like behind their backs were whispering like, that's just a straight woman, right? And sometimes the people sort of whispering this in a snarky way were themselves openly and visibly not straight, right? So there was a little
Hmm.
bit of that aspect, sort of like the straight women who find themselves interesting, the spicy straights, that whole phenomenon.
Right.
Population wise, though, the bigger phenomenon is just the sort of regrettably, I'm straight woman who
Right.
admits it about herself, but wishes it were otherwise. Can I just ask you, if I totally remove the headphones, does this then still work?
It does. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do
Go,
that. I'm
go
gonna go
completely acoustic.
headphones
There you
free.
go. Yeah. Say something else.
I will say something else.
There you
One.
go. Perfect. Yeah, no, Phoebe, there are a couple like tent pole historical events that that you discuss in The Last Straight Woman. For those of you who just tuned in, again, this is what we're talking about. That I want to bring up because it felt like I noticed these shifts too. Yeah, like I don't know how to position this, so it's
Yeah.
just kind of always around. I noticed these shifts too, kind of post Me Too, right? Which that was a kind of like feminist reckoning that both in many ways needed to happen and right I think shifted a kind of cultural discourse in ways that might have been I don't know troubling to put it gently. You talk about the kind of post Me Too like heterosexual outlook, female heterosexual outlook as like basically I'm constantly being hit on by men. It's almost like men's affections are just like attacking me from every direction. You mentioned R.O. Kwan essay, which I read as well, that I thought, it was kind of paradigmatic of this. The Emily Ratajkowski, I'm just going to say Emrata because I always butcher her name. I'm sorry, Emily. I know you're watching.
Radakowski. I learned this while doing
Rataj.
was looked up for me in real time mid audiobook.
Oh,
I had to literally come back and redo where I had said it wrong.
gosh. Yeah, that is, well, that's fortunate though, because you'll never forget.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, that kind of the Emrata being another great a pillar of this of like her book being both I think a valuable entry right into the kind of post Me Too feminist canon and at the same time a way of characterizing the heterosexual female experience as like and unwarranted attack. The female subject is just desireless. It's just like I have no desire for men. I'm kind of like anodyne in that way. I'm just kind of like neutral and small, but I am quite hot, right? And I'm interested in too in talking with you about the attractiveness stuff too because you cover that so beautifully. Um, and so if you could speak a little bit more about like how like feminist discourse shaped this concept of heterosexuality as we're just like warding off men or can't even or get rid of the men. Yikes.
Sure, absolutely. So Me Too is so fascinating in this regard because prior to Me Too, feminists were stereotyped as unattractive, as unappealing.
Right.
The women who can't get up,
Right.
therefore are not looking for men. They say they don't want a man.
Yes.
There are no men knocking. And also prior to Me Too, there was a lot of beauty standards discourse, a lot of women saying how unfair it is that men prefer a younger woman, a thinner woman, a prettier woman, whatever, What
Right.
happened with Me Too was this weird flip where all of a sudden the feminists were the women who get hit on constantly by men and are feeling victimized by men. Now, in
Yeah.
the actual world, domestic violence, assault, all of these things are real and they do not exclusively impact beautiful women. I feel like this is obvious, but maybe not.
Right. Right.
Awful things happen in nursing homes. There's Giselle Pellico. Yes, one can do the whole litany, and I even have a Britcom example in my book of a frumpy older woman who gets
Yeah.
quite disturbingly groped on Keeping Up Appearances. Hyacinth gets
Mm-hmm.
rather often groped, and it's played for laughs, and there's a laugh track. Anyway, the 90s were a different time. But
Yeah.
what happened with Me Too is that the experience specifically of being a beautiful woman who's sort of asked out every time she leaves the house, that became discussed a lot as how it is to be a woman. And
Right.
various narratives, like the ones you just mentioned, and some others as well, would be sort of regularly written about in terms of this is what it is to be a woman. This is how
Right.
all women experience things. And then you would get these, male feminist allies saying, I had no idea that every woman I know, when she leaves the house, is just thronged by men. And this was a weird thing to witness as a woman who leaves the house. And like, I'm looking, the throng, they're not there right this second.
Where are my
Or,
firemen?
I'm
Where are my
40,
shirtless firemen?
where they plenty to more, but not to the degree that it's described. And
Right.
it made it very awkward then to talk about such things as wanting men, and more to the point, wanting men who might not always want you back, because that became very incel coded. It was like
Right.
only creepy men would want somebody who doesn't want them back. And it just felt like there was this, on the one hand, there was an important thing being brought up, and not by no means for the first time, but being brought up often during Me Too about, male sexual violence and all of this.
Right.
But then there was something about the female experience that is true of not all, but nearly all women, that just got kind of erased. And
Yeah.
I just started thinking about it. I mean, what kind of prompted the book was I was just thinking about how many women are we actually talking about here? How
Mm.
often, from the time you first have attractions till death, are you going to be the woman who could be like the love interest?
Right.
Oh, and that's just such a short period of time, whereas the time spent being attracted to men is going to be much greater. For some women, that's all you're ever going to get. You're never going to be, the love interest sort. And I wanted to just kind of refocus things and think a little bit about the women who are desiring men more strongly than they're being desired by men.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean that it feels almost Phoebe, like Me Too had this weird effect. We're speaking from personal experience. Like it's almost like the aperture for what constitutes a woman, what is a woman, was narrowing radically. And I like I'm actually your book inspired me to start this essay. I'm writing about kind of like Freya India, the manosphere, all this jazz, but I'm releasing it on Sunday. And as I'm writing this and reading your book, I'm thinking about what essentially like caused me during the 2010s to feel less and less like a woman, right? And it was first and foremost, it was the fact that I felt like I was leading a bit of a double life. Like I was as conventionally heterosexual appearing and cute and whatever, but it felt like that began to feel like filing out paperwork, like tax forms. Like I was like, oh God, and now this man's going to desire. And so in some ways, it was like a shift in corporeal style, to quote Judith Butler. But it was, I was kind of moving away from um, one way of being that felt like tiresome and felt like I guess inauthentic, to another way of being that was like, a widening of the aperture of desire for me. I was like, oh, I'm actually interested in women as well. But then that had this odd effect with on me that I don't know would have been happening otherwise, like in a different era. Um, of making me question whether I was actually a woman in the first place. Because I was like, well, if I don't want to continue to try to look like my best approximation of, indie darling, and that's woman. That's what a woman is. And that's who Me Too is like protecting, essentially, right? But like that, I think we're missing something here because like just like you said, women are victims, of sexual assaults. Men are victims of sexual assault. This is a kind of the category is broader than the like single hot fending off male attention subject that's being posited here.
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring all of this up because I think often when people talk about gender and sort of boundaries of gender, what's talked about is specifically sort of visibly gender nonconforming women or people,
Hmm.
that is the term they're using, assigned female at birth people who are
Right.
visibly non-gender conforming and generally at least partially interested in women.
Right.
What you start to see when you just kind of look just at straight womanhood is that there's a lot of discomfort on the part of the cishets, the cishet ladies with being a woman. And it's not with being a woman in the sense of preferring to be called with male pronouns or something like that. But that's what you see when you're getting the sort of woman who says, I wish, like, sort of the whole gay man trapped in a woman's body thing, which is
Yeah.
women who you don't get a lot of women saying this anymore, and there's even like a whole think piece in the Huffington Post from the 2010s, I believe, about why that's very problematic, so don't say it, whatever. But you do see this yearning, and I have a chapter about this in the book, on the part of certain straight women to sort of be who they are, look how they look like a woman, be with men, but be the protagonist. And the way that this often gets articulated is being more like a gay man, being it's either being the protagonist or just anything that you might want that isn't specifically picket fence style
Yep.
conventionality. And
Yeah.
I don't want to snark on it. Like, it was a kind of hard thing to express because on the one hand, I get where women like this are coming from, and I have had gay men refer to me as being this thing. So like I don't want to, like, it's not all appropriation. But at the same time, like, straight women, spoiler, are not gay men. And, you know, like, there's something really where, like, it's kind of hard to set up, but basically, where you see straight womanhood being discussed as though it's almost a kind of cultural appropriation of being a gay man, like
Mm.
kind of camp and femme or something. It's like, but that's just like, I think straight women know what they're doing a lot of the times, and like get discussed as though there's kind of like natural, sort of passive, conventional femininity on the one hand, and sort of like camp, intentional femininity on the other. And I think these things are a little bit more vague than that.
It makes me actually wonder about like heated rivalry, and of course, a little life before it. The Fujoshi, right, kind of project, and this is, I guess, a very, I think, portified term, but it is a one way of coding or describing desire that allows a kind of very passionate female protagonist, right? That makes space for like a desiring female subject. It's just wild though, because why is it the case that that woman then has to be like step into the role of a gay guy? All these kinds of like, okay, like pieties, if we shed them, if we don't have to worry about like, am I appropriating the gay male? Okay, who cares? I just want to look at this, almost like academically. It's like why can't the feminism you describe in this book that everyone should purchase, why is the feminism where it's like you have that kind of nerdy Klobuchar who's like, what a hot guy, and it doesn't really matter how I look, the hyacinth bucket who's not necessarily in being attacked so much as being like the desiring subject, and the man is the like handsome object. Why is that such a troubling feminism to people? Like, why can't people sit with that,
Yeah, I mean, I
you
think there are a
think?
couple things here. One is that my internet connection is unstable. I apologize, but I will keep talking under the assumption that you can hear me. Um, I want to kind of separate out, though, the sort of heated rivalry type thing. While I still have not seen heated rivalry, I kind of get the gist of what people are finding interesting about it and what it is.
Mhm.
I do think there's a kind of overcomplication of why a straight woman would want to see two attractive men in a sexual context, where it gets discussed as like it's that they want to be safe. It's like, or it's that they're queering heterosexuality, and it's like, no, they're just. It's the same as when, you
Yeah,
know, the same as when a man wants to see two attractive women involved with each other.
right.
It's like. we don't need to go crazy with that. But like,
Right.
but why does it get treated like this? I think it is just ultimately, I'm going to be boring about this, sexism. I think it's just to be
Sure.
a whole person is not coded as female, and to show that you are a full person with an inner life, there are ways of doing that by saying, well, I'm not like the usual women who are just interested in men. I'm either somehow not as much of a woman or not just interested in men. And that's a way of kind of sending the bat signal that you are not an inner life lacking sheep, basically. And I'm saying, I think most people are pretty ordinary, whatever their labels, and that life is more fun when you just are, having the relationships you want to be having, whatever they may be. And yeah, that's about it. Yeah, and also yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that actually, I want to read this joke in the chat because it ties into what I'm about to say. Jenna writes that there's a joke from her childhood. How many feminists does it take to screw in a light bulb? One, and that's not funny. I've heard that before, and I love that one. I think that, Phoebe, when we're thinking about different like waves of feminism, and we're really contending with second versus third wave feminism, um, the 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 issues, I mean, the way the second wave kind of like dealt with its internal struggles, fractured, accomplished what it did accomplish, that's a story I think for another Substack live. But the kind of the cultural shifts that led us to the third wave um, had, I think, the had I think like a more mixed set of goals, right? Like it's like what's at issue is no longer we can't vote or we can't have credit cards or like um people should maybe understand that rape can happen within a marriage, right? Like what's at issue is, I think, a different kind of cultural reckoning. We had the repressed memories thing of the 90s, right? That pseudoscience um was, of course, I think the panic was rooted in the fact that there was, sexual assault happening within families left and right. But you saw this kind of like, whoa, overblown pseudoscience, pseudoscientific outgrowth, right? And then I think with Me Too, again, rooted in truth, right? You have a ton of sexual assaults happening in these professional settings, these really high pressure spaces. And then you see this sort of outgrowth of like well, if I'm not, if I'm not the object, essentially, right? If I'm not receiving these attentions, like, am I a woman at all? And on the other hand, you have like the kind of the heteropessimism, right? And the spicy straights who see heterosexuality as a foreclosed upon option. It's a doomed future. What can I do? I'm attracted to men, and that really is awful. I'm thinking of Asa Saracen's heteropessimism, which you explicate, I think, really effectively in the book. But it's all about that, right? It's all about like, oh, it's just the worst. It's the worst that I like men and I desire men. And I think that to be maybe a hetero realist, right, if not a hetero optimist, there's something that like there's some kind of shift in the conversation that I think needs to happen around like what we're reacting to. And so I guess I'm curious, like you saw this as a 2010s phenomenon. You saw this as a Donald Trump gets elected. Donald Trump is the kind of like bad man figure we all have animus for, or the your average feminist, right? Sensibly. Do you see any other sort of shifts in the culture that kind of shaped this third wave discourse where like, oh, now the feminist is hot, and in fact the feminist like looks a certain way, maybe even modifies her appearance a certain way? Like, are you seeing anything else that kind of shaped this feminist subject in the 2010s?
Sure. I mean, I'm going to try to do a chronological overview here that's going to be extremely shoddy. So if this were an actual gender studies class, I would be lucky to get through with a gentleman's, is it a D or C? Gentleman's D sounds funnier.
A gentle person's D.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
Um,
gentle them's D. Yeah, please.
yeah. Well, I was just the aspect of things, but um, I can't help myself. I'm sorry. Apologies. But I think
Buy her book.
there was first this moment of, there was like political lesbianism, all of this, as in the
Right.
sense of being politically opposed to being involved with men, whether or not you have any interest in women. That did happen. There was that whole era where we're going to leap ahead to more recently. And I think there was this kind of sex positive moment in the 90s, early 2000s. I'm thinking of like, I was an avid, and I still am, Savage Love Cast listener during
Yeah.
period, but also what you would see in pop culture generally of, you know, everybody likes sex. Everybody, men and women, enjoy casual sex. It's all great. Anybody who would knock it is a conservative and mean and evil, and all that matters is consenting adults. Then I think what started to happen was people, including progressives, started to pick up on such things as campus sexual assault and sexual assault in other contexts, and just generally the fact that men and women do not face the exact same issues in the hetero dating world, or just in the world generally, or in the workplace, whatever. What should have happened, okay, actually kind of comes through. There's this really great Medium post by Marie Leconte that I quote in the book. She's a French journalist in the UK. And she wrote about how basically in an office, if you are the woman the men are leching at, that's bad. And if you are the woman the men are ignoring, that's bad too, for different reasons. And the problem is like women always being judged in that way, and not simply like a problem of beautiful women specific.
Sure.
She wasn't saying like, oh, but it's worse if you're not attractive. She's saying like that's there's this bigger systemic problem. Instead, what happened with Me Too is there was this kind of redefinition of womanhood as effectively the incel definition of womanhood. Like
Exactly.
when the incels said, the proverbial incel. I don't mean like a specific incel who's sitting right here. Hi. But when the incel says no woman would have me, he's talking about, it's implied that he means a beautiful woman of
Yes.
sort. When William, I'm going to butcher his name, Deresiewicz, I once did have to know this because of the audiobook, wrote some piece about the unfuckable hate nerds for tablet. And
Mm.
he was talking about how it is when you're a sort of like reasonably attractive young woman and there are all these men buying you drinks and giving you every
Mhm.
opportunity. This isn't really, that's not how it goes. But anyway, so we had Me Too.
Mm-mm.
What happened then was Me Too offered no kind of constructive thing to do about any of this, because nobody wanted to be a carceral feminist. Nobody progressive did. So then you
Right.
got the so-called reactionary feminists who are saying, no, no, the answer is that you should just get married young. And I say this as if this is in the past tense. This is all still active, on
Oh yeah.
elsewhere,
Totally.
which, to their credit, they acknowledge certain gender differences. And sure, not less to their credit, as the answer doesn't entirely make sense, because there's a reason that this sort of gender neutral sex positivity came about in the first place. Where we're at now seems to be possibly, this is what I wrote about for the Globe and Mail most recently, a kind of backlash to the backlash to the backlash moment, as there so often is, where both because of Trump coming back and issue sort of the whole vibe shift or whatever with, you know, a new social conservatism happening,
Mhm.
there's some genuine suppression of minority sexualities. That is also what's also happening, is it's just not as chic to be the spicy straight, perhaps, as
Right.
it was. So some of what I'm talking about, it's these waves, right? And like, I'm not like, well, the question that throws me off most in interviews is when somebody's like, so what's happening with the youth of today? And like, how is it today for a 17-year-old? And I'm like, that I don't know. I
Not
don't,
no. Yeah.
yeah.
It makes me think about like the how the incel definition of womanhood, right, became the adoptive definition. And I think how it was easier for me to, well, I mean, I think it felt like there was more social pressure to absent myself from womanhood when that was a definition. Cause I was like, well, I'm not going to continue filling out these endless tax forms of like doing this heterosexuality this way. And at the end of the day, right, like I'm probably on the Kinsey scale way closer to lesbianism than anything else. But there was this sort of it felt like an escape valve at the time, but it ended up being, I think, more trouble for me, at least personally, than it was worth, because I was like, whoa, 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 like I'm not necessarily sure at the end of the day this means that I'm a man. Of course, I was having these kind of manifold health problems from the transition, the medicine related to the transition, that caused me to just like have to evaluate that. Again, an individual experience, of course, but I'm kind of pivoting back to the spicy straight conversation because I really want to get into straightness studies. But you are talking about essentially like the queerness as this kind of like blanket safe landing pad, right, for a lot of women who are experiencing almost like heterosexual anxiety, right? If I can walk into a room, right, and say like, oh yeah, like I'm a demisexual queer poly person, and at the end of the day what's happening is that my boyfriend has two other girlfriends and I'm in a sister bit of a sister wife situation,
Yeah.
not to bring up adult braces. Sorry. um, but like that felt like kind of a way to maybe window dress heterosexuality in a time when straightness had a bad rap. And so you're seeing now, broadly culturally, we're not talking about how it's going for the average Gen Alpha kid, but like you're seeing a shift away from that. And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Yes. So this is what I've been seeing since turning in the book, basically. And
Yeah.
it was really this whole Lindy West debacle that made me think along these lines because I was expecting I knew who she was. I knew that
Hmm.
famous in the arenas in which she's famous. I know roughly where various sort of cultural critic type people stand politically. So when I saw like Roxane Gay on Threads and Kate Mann on Substack
Really good.
and others being like taking the same view on this whole story as the heterodox sorts and
Hmm.
to some extent as even like conservative people, I had to wonder whether like there had been this kind of myth going on that queerness was feminism. Not that any
Right.
feminism worth its salt has a place for lesbians and for bi women, anything like that, but like that
Absolutely.
queerness is feminism, that these are the same thing, that they are interchangeable. What you saw with the whole Lindy West story, which for the last remaining non Lindy West story knower, basically a woman wrote about how her husband was cheating on her, but rather than dumping his ass, she embraced polyamory and claimed that there was something vaguely queer about the throuple that resulted, even though it's unclear whether the two women are involved. Whatever. That's the really,
Right.
really short version of it. But it she's like her claim in the book and in the publicity for the book also seems to be very much like, don't judge this. We have transcended the conventional, and I think there was a time when that would have flown and when people would have been like, don't judge. That's very modern. We shouldn't expect that everybody wants monogamy. We shouldn't expect that everybody wants heterosexuality. Sometimes a woman can like another woman, that sort of thing. And
Sure.
you had all these people who got all of that, but were like, yeah, a woman might want that, but this woman clearly wanted a faithful husband. And I thought that there was just something interesting in the sort of widespread, with really very few exceptions, rejection of the idea that just making a situation either queer or unconventional or somewhere in that realm automatically makes it feminist, which should be
Mhm.
obvious. But I feel like for a while it wasn't. So that's what showed me that a tide was probably shifting. for sure.
Totally. Yeah, I think that like it's like it's one thing, right, to have a kind of legitimate interest, a desire, right? And desire, well, maybe this is something I want to get into a bit later, but desire can be difficult to admit to. Desire can be a kind of a finicky, troubling thing for some people. And so it's one thing to be like, you know what, I do have a desire to be in this throuple, right? Like I really want to be with my husband. I really want to be with this other woman, like romantically. It's actually that's what's going on. It's another thing. It's one thing to do that, and another thing to be like, hey, I, I'm kind of papering over a lot of fears and self doubts and self criticisms, right? And trying to save this marriage by just kind of calling my husband's cheating anti empire. And like that I think that is maybe the extrapolation that felt difficult for a lot of us who would otherwise feel very progressively. I think about such an arrangement such as Lindy West's.
Hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, I was just going to say I just wanted to add the angle that her husband uses he, they pronouns.
Right.
A rendering discursively, even if she were monogamous with this individual, it's still a queer relationship on paper. On paper being perhaps the part I would emphasize there.
Yeah, the operative. Totally, because I think that, going back to the spicy straight, right, outlook, or you can be a guy who really wants a harem, right? But you can just kind of throw a new pronoun on it and and call it anti-empire. And I think that kind of like it's tricky, right? Because we are talking about desire. We are talking about something that per your book, right? I think per the Amias Srinivasan essays we saw go out a few years, quite a long time ago now, actually, about the Elliot Gould, or not Elliot Gould, excuse me, the not the
Elliot Roger, somebody
Elliot Rogers, thank you. Yeah, the young, very much not Elliot Gould, the young
sort of sexy 70s Jewish man. No, wait.
in the 70s Jewish piano playing man who was a bit of an insult. No, Elliot Rodger, the incel who committed this.
I start talking about the differing chest hair situations. You're gonna.
You do, yeah. It might just boil down to the chest hair. It might boil down to like the chest hair maxing and the failure to optimize. He just he would have been able to, yeah.
Please continue.
But yeah, Amias Srinivasan wrote about the Elliot Rodger mass shooting in this essay called "Does Anyone Have the Right to Sex?" Right, and it's essentially about the the incel phenomenon as the cultural bigotry kind of embedded in it, and the incel phenomenon is something that's not to necessarily to be negotiated with, right, but to be understood in terms of like like desire can be politically interrogated, right? So it's not that these guys have a right to sex, right? It's not that these guys are going to like absolutely just wither and die, and there'll be so many public shootings if we just stop this Lysistrata nonsense and have sex with them, right? No, that's not what she's positing, but she's positing that there can be a kind of a identity bias or political bias that is linked up with one's desire, right? And I think the essay wades into some sort of challenging territory, right? And the Andrea Long Chu rears her head as that is something that tends to happen when an essay gets troubling. But I want to talk about like what this, I think, like what this means for the place we're in right now, right? Because like desire is kind of a sticky, finicky thing. Inceldom is a cultural phenomenon, has kind of like married itself to choice feminism in ways that feel challenging to me. I know I'm really like going for the gold here, but I see neoliberal choice feminism like, you do you, girl. Like, get the surgery. Like, basically, make yourself look as hot as
When you sorry,
possible.
have to clarify, do you mean that they've merged in the sense of like clavicular and the looks maxing and the men who,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
and like, so like kind of we're recasting, right? Like, meeting these impossible incel coded standards of attractiveness as being the thing you could choose to do to take care of yourself and just love yourself, right?
yeah. Yeah. Oh boy, I have many thoughts on this. And these do really actually kind of bring me back to my early blogging days, circa like 2006 or 2008 or whatever, because a lot of this, it feels new, but it kind of isn't, which
Yeah.
is, I don't think people should interrogate their own desire. I think when you know what you like, you shouldn't try to argue with yourself into liking something else or out of liking that. I think
Sure.
things in the sort of embodied world have a natural way of working themselves out such that
Hmm.
people don't want to be always alone. And
Hmm.
even if on a screen you might think you only want one thing, in the world of actual people, you're going to have to make certain, it won't even feel like compromises. You know what I mean? You will be
Yeah,
involved with the people you actually are interacting with, some of, and I really
absolutely.
there's something that comes up in a bunch of the very limited, surprisingly limited, and this maybe kind of segues us into straightness studies, but there's not that much discussion of straightness and specifically straight womanhood as a category. But when you do see it, you see a lot of like, well, women should interrogate what it is they like about men. And I've
Right.
always found this very silly because I feel like I make a list of qualities that seem male to me. And you could name women who have all of those qualities, and I can tell you already without having met these women that I'm not interested in them. Why? Because, and I think there's something kind of
Hmm.
insulting about interrogating, like anybody feeling they have to interrogate what they like and don't, just from a consent perspective, like consent is sort of minimum perspective. Like if somebody says they're not interested, and you don't get to sort of question or second guess why, that's just it. But I think that in the world, if people are interacting in person, these things tend to work themselves out. However, if they're not interacting in person, you can have a lot of people at home kind of stewing, and that's another whole question. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, that I can't agree more with the wisdom of like, your desires. It's not that your desires need to be interrogated for best practice or praxis, as the case may be. It's that you're human. Your desires are going to kind of just be like, you'll be surprised maybe by the shape your desire takes based on the social interactions, the milieu you're in, the people you're with. Like, I completely agree with that. And I think that there's you put that so beautifully, Phoebe, that it jogged my own thought, because I think there's a way in which there's like almost like a consumer funnel, for these new kind of plastic surgery interventions, like the kind of Haley Naiman had that great Botox psyop essay that was really viral on here about how, in fact, a lot of women aren't getting Botox. A lot of millennial women aren't getting Botox. But I feel like the sales funnel, right? It's like any sales funnel, it has to happen really quickly, and it's kind of trying to like short circuit the that slower self discovery that happens when you're just kind of doing stuff socially. And hey, it could start online. You could meet someone who's writing you like, or who's whatever photo, who knows? But
Little different from like, I think what happens is you get these where people are just sort of not, there's no offline, and that's where I think.
there's no offline. Exactly. Totally. Exactly. And so then you're prevented from like letting it rest for a minute. And
Hmm.
then you
Yeah.
quickly have to do the intervention because, oh, that's the feminist thing. You want to take care of yourself, and that's
Well,
your choice.
I think in the sort of more offline earlier eras, when you would have the proverbial adolescent girl, could be a boy, whatever, who hates their looks, you could always say, look
Mhm.
around you. How many couples do you see are composed of two supermodels? You know,
Exactly.
and I think that gets harder to do for somebody whose whole life is on Instagram or TikTok or whatever.
Totally. And I
Right?
think that's
Yeah.
well, yeah, I think that's again speaking from experience, that felt like the sales funnel that caught me during COVID, where I'm an adult, right? But I'm really sheltering in place. I'm just kind of teaching classes online. It's a little bit easier, if I'm not already partnered to kind of be like, whoa, I'm immersed in this virtual world and I know what the political best practice here is. So there's some challenges to that for sure. But I think going into straightness studies, I'm really keen to talk a little bit about some of these queer theorists and queer theory more broadly that you bring up in the book, because heteropessimism was an essay that when I first read it, I think it came out in 2019, the Asa Sarensen essay, that of course really like struck me back then. And it's not that it doesn't that I doubt Saracen or want to discredit him. I find it to be, a very truthful piece of criticism. But I think when I come back to it now, I'm seeing the attitude of a lot of non-straight people, a lot of like, lesbian, especially women, bisexual women who are kind of positioning themselves as experts on straightness, not because they are living the embodied heterosexual experience, because definitionally we're not, right? But there's a sense of the Adrian Rich, right? The man, I kind of had to try this out and I know the ways in which I didn't fit. And I think Saracen does really capture that beautifully. I think and in fact, I think Butler's Gender Trouble captures so much of that. The way in which it starts to get tricky for me, and with theorists like Butler especially, is and Ward, who I think you is a paradigmatic case of this, is then it's like, you know what? It wasn't for me. That means it can't be for anyone else. Let me save you, you poor straight woman, from the disgusting men surrounding you. That feels, to use an outdated term, problematic. And I'm like really interested in kind of how you unpack that aspect of straightness studies.
Sure. So I should say I first wrote about straightness studies for the Hedgehog Review, and it's not an actual department at a university that I,
No.
but it's my for basically the academic and beyond academia focus on straightness as its own category. So that could be gender studies, discipline type things. It could be essays in something like the New Inquiry, like where On Heteropessimism appeared. I've
Mhm.
also written for the New Inquiry, but not recently. I hope they still exist and are thriving. It could also be like the subreddit, Are the Straights Okay? Um,
Right.
it's a whole thing. But basically, it makes perfect sense. And I owe a debt to this field that gender studies would be which entity would have first thought to look at straightness in isolation.
Mhm.
That's absolutely who thought of the idea. That's where the way of looking at things came from, because as should be obvious, there is a crap ton written and, you know, art about all sorts of things about straight women. But to say straight women as versus just women, by which what's meant is straight women, comes from gender studies, queer studies, all of this, right? And I think that that is an important way of looking at things because it is a specific thing. It's a specific thing that
Totally.
applies to most women, but it is still specific. And if you talk about female desire and aren't specifying which sort, yeah, I think that's correct to do. So in a way, I'm, as I often refer to myself on Feminine Chaos, I'm woke baby in reference, an homage to the famous board book. But yeah, I think, yes, focusing on straightness as its own category makes sense. Where I think, and it also makes sense just for the happenstance reason of where it's coming from, or not even happenstance, that the theorists themselves would not be straight on the whole, or ever, perhaps. So, I mean, there are a few. There was one like compendium that had a bunch of different entries that had some of which were straight. But like on the whole, this is not a particularly straight field. That all makes sense. Where it tends to fall apart are kind of two places. One is this the sort of hierarchy of understanding, sort of the theoretical idea that the oppressed understands the oppressor, but not vice versa. So you get this a little bit in Jane Ward's The Tragedy of Heterosexuality in that book, where she's talking about like, if you're straight and reading this and this doesn't resonate, you're wrong. I see it more than you. I can see what you can't
Right.
see. So it's not even just like that these are scholars who don't have a firsthand experience, the lived experience of being straight in a heartfelt sense. And I'm going to get, sorry, this is a little bit long-winded, but
Sure.
what I
No.
mean by they don't have experience of being straight in the sense that I mean, where it is what you actually feel as versus a role you're playing at a certain time. They don't have the experience of being exclusively attracted to the opposite sex. So, but they're not, it's not only that they're not saying that this limits their understandings, but this is supposed to be a superpower for understanding.
Right.
Right. What I'm saying is, yeah, it's a superpower for thinking of this as as like a conceptual category to study in isolation, sure, but it doesn't, but it leads to this certain blind spot of not understanding Romeo and Juliet, not understanding
No.
any situation where or Anna Karenina or any situation
Right.
in a man and a woman have some kind of attraction, or one of them has some attraction to the other, or a woman is attracted to too many men or sleeps with them and too quickly for what society thinks, whatever. All these structures exist inhibiting what people can do within heterosexuality. Why? You know what I mean? So it just
Right.
it you arrive at this idea of heterosexuality where it is conventionality. It is that which is expected of, to just simplify, women. And what I'm saying is there are certainly expectations inhibiting what women do, but for the vast majority of women, the relevant inhibition isn't inhibited from sleeping with women. It's inhibited from sleeping with the sexy man on the bus because you don't even know what his name is. You know what I mean? Like
Right. Right.
that's what I'm trying to get at. And so what that means is you have this body of literature about who straight women are that kind of talks around the things that feel very obvious to me about the authenticity of this desire, but that don't to people who aren't experiencing it. And here I just like two other things. One, when I say straight, that they don't have experience of being straight, I mean they don't have experience of like that being their actual sexual orientation. They certainly, like most people, would have experience of being thought to be straight until coming out otherwise. The other thing I would say is there's something specific that happens when you're talking about scholars who are, give or take, whatever the terms they use for it, bisexual women.
Mhm.
Because what you sometimes get are accounts that are basically like, and this is Jane Ward also, although there's a lot to say about Lisa Diamond and female sexual fluidity, which is a little different. But anyway, you get women who basically say, well, I used to have a boyfriend, now I have a girlfriend, now I have a wife, and you can too.
Right.
And I mean, I'm not like this great logician here. You know what I mean? Like it feels like, yeah, you could do that. Not you rap, but one could do that because if one has that sort of extensive capacity for attractions. But
Sure.
for most women, they either aren't going to be attracted to women at all, or in some cases, like 2% attracted in some way where like that's never gonna be who's gonna be their partner. So it's effectively not at all. And then that leaves, yeah, like realistically, they're gonna be they do not have that choice. And you end up kind of horseshoeing yourself back into like a conversion therapy sort of place.
Yeah. Wow. The Yeah, I think too you have with with Sarenson, not with early Butler, but definitely with Ward. I haven't read Lisa Diamond. This idea that there is it's Hegelian, it's Marxian. It's kind of like, okay, the future is progressing towards kind of like something that's more optimal, right, than our culture is now. And the optimal culture will be post gender, kind of like post sexuality. It's a queer future. Queer futurity is where we're headed, and it's where you should be headed if you're enlightened. And I think while this certainly appealed to me in the 2010s, I think the reason that I have that's felt there are several reasons that's now feels challenging to me, but I think one of them is that just what you're describing, you're overriding the reality of just like point blank women's attraction to men, right? We're talking about not women being attracted to trans men. We're talking about women being the haver of a vagina, being attracted to the haver of a penis, right? Like this is something that it's hard to rhetorically overwrite that material reality. And it actually, you're describing the straightness studies literature and the way it works. Of course, this is not a formal academic department or departments, but this is something that exists in a lot of English departments, and a lot of kind of queer studies preoccupies itself with what's up with the straights. And it's funny enough, it actually reminds me of Edward Said's argument in Orientalism, which is that you're like, hey, like, if you really want an actual history of the Middle East, maybe you should ask someone who's from the region. And I never thought I'd be comparing you to Edward Said, Phoebe, but
Well,
but like
no, but I mean, like, that's the whole thing, like, own voices, right? But nobody would
yeah,
frame it like that, because the idea is that there's supposed to be the superior knowledge is supposed to be coming from the marginalized, right? And,
right.
um, yeah, I don't know. I think you have to, if you're asking about, if you genuinely want to know what's up with straight people, it does hurt. Talk to some, to listen to what some straight people have to say about it. And I don't think that that's, and yeah, to be clear, like, I feel like I should have prefaced all of this with this, but I'm not advocating for more women to be straight than are, or fewer, or any particular number. I'm just saying, I'm trying to sort of tell it like it is about this being very commonplace.
Yeah, like we're talking about kind of like sexuality realism, right? Like one can find something out about his or her sexuality, but one cannot rhetorically reverse engineer her or his sexuality, right? And I think the idea that like your political commitments, you can interrogate so much that you find the more politically expedient sexuality to have is this. That's not possible.
I mean, I was just going to say regarding Lisa Diamond and female sexual fluidity. So this is a 2008 book that I write about in my book, which is that basically this, it's not, she's not saying that any woman could start sleeping with women and enjoy that. What she's saying, though, it becomes this discursive thing, where one of the things she writes is that basically, so she does this study. I've got to get the numbers wrong, but it's something like 100 women, of whom like 10 are straight or something like that. There's not very many straight women there, and they're kind of tacked on at the end. But the straight ones, she says, like, all of them would have had some sort of like a little bit of sexual fluidity because they
Mm,
had close female friendships. And it's like, okay, well, if you
mm,
define that as sexual fluidity, yeah, everybody is sexually fluid, but is that a useful way of defining it? Does that mean anything? And it feels
right.
to me insulting both to actual lesbian and bisexual women to refer to that as sexual fluidity, and also just kind of useless for describing things in the world, I guess.
Well, yeah, and here's where we're horseshoeing once again to counter feminism, because it reminds me of the earliest definitions of homosexuality. We are concerning ourselves with men, right? It is the kind of like the male homosexuality is what's at issue. The laws against homosexuality are about like men sleeping together. Female homosexuality gets glossed because like without the highly politicized apparatus involved, they're companions, and they're just kind of cuddling together. And this is where I think you have that kind of infantilization of female sexual desire on across a lot of different spectra, but this is certainly one of them where it's like, well, isn't it also a kind of friendship? Neutering female sexual desire like that, yeah, it's certainly troublesome. I want to also say I have just one more question for you, Phoebe, but I want to say anyone who's listening in, tuning in, Phoebe Maltz Bovy is the author of The Last Straight Woman. It is a fantastic book. We're both holding copies of it. Look at the design on the back too. God, I love the art of this cover. Here's the spine. If you have any questions for her, please type them into the chat. We'll be sure to answer them at the very end. Phoebe, this is my last question on the topic of the straight female voice, the like straight female art. I don't know how you're going to characterize it. You have a section in here about Taylor Swift, right? That we don't even have to go in. We don't have to do the Swiftian hagiography. That's not what we're here for. But you do describe her as an example of someone who really is, at the end of the day, talking about a woman desiring men, right? Gaylor's, I'm so sorry. But this is a heterosexual woman who has massively, has with her talent put to voice, I think, a very common specific, not common specific, my God, but what I'm trying to say is that she's taken her specific love affairs, made them universal through her voice. And the way they're so easily universalizable is because this is a thing that a lot of women experience, loving men, wanting men, end of the day. Right. And I'm really interested in your take, Phoebe, on where we're seeing, I don't know how better to categorize it, but just kind of representations of heterosexual female desire in media and literature that have kind of caught, maybe if they haven't caught fire like Taylor's, they're about to. Where do you see that next wave of stories coming from?
Well, Taylor Swift, yeah, I just to sort of expands a little on what you just said. What's so interesting about her is that I think some of the Gaylor phenomenon comes from just sort of wishful thinking and wanting to be seen, which, look, I'm Jewish. I get it. I get being part of a minority group and wanting to be seen. Fair enough. I think Taylor Swift is Jewish, however.
Oh, very much not.
Taylor. But yeah, I would say that I think there's something about the fact also that she's so successful, so wealthy, so famous, such a big deal, that doesn't square for people with the fact that it's from singing about desire for men. Because, and then this gets discussed as this kind of sexist thing, it's sexist to even think about it like that, as if there's something inherently passive happening, but it's quite the contrary. It's
right.
She's pretty alpha there, and
Yep.
what's the thing she's doing is singing a song about beautiful football players and Harry Styles, and more power to her. In terms of more recent representations, Lena Dunham certainly.
Lena Dunham, cut and dry, absolutely.
Lena Dunham comes to mind. So Fame Sick came out before The Last Straight Woman, but I would have definitely wanted to write about it had it already existed. I wrote a little bit about tiny furniture and I guess girls as well, but Lena Dunham writes a lot about just kind of this role she's had both in her life and in her autofiction, broadly defined, of being a not supermodel looking woman who really likes the beautiful men, and there's no sense in which she's sort of passive she's the protagonist. This is not, and she writes in interesting and complicated ways about it. It's not that I'm raising her up as this icon of some sort of impeccable feminism. And she talks about, getting self-worth from feeling desired in these different ways. She has a lot of complicated thoughts about this, but she does, for her, what's interesting and what she has in common with her friend, as I understand it, Taylor Swift, is that being super ambitious artists is not in conflict
with being straight women. And you never see this with straight male artists. You never think, oh well, he likes to this rock star likes to sleep with women. He must be very distracted from his art. It
Right.
would be part of it, and I think while I don't personally expect to be either like a Taylor Swift or Lena Dunham in my own, you know, I'm not that deluded, but I do think there is something like you can be a serious person, have big ambitions, and you know, have any gender or sexual orientation. There's no reason these things would be linked up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the kind of like queerness as visionary or like illegible, like subtextual queerness is what has to be happening if someone like has achieved whatever artistic success. I think that what troubles me about that, right, is I'm at the point where not only do I believe that people are just straight, people are bi, they're straight, they're gay, whatever, but I also am struggling to find the way in which the kind of like it's almost like a theology, right? It's like the exalted marginalized, right, is kind of almost looking down on the evil oppressor. I just don't see how where is I see the chauvinism of inceldom. I see the coerciveness, right, of like you need to alter your appearance because you don't look a certain way. I just don't quite see like straight women oppress me and I need to save them from the role of oppressor being a kind of a legible cultural stance, a defensible cultural stance. So yeah, to that end, right? Why has Taylor's music reached so many people? Why is Lita so popular? I think it is just because of this is the honesty, right? And this is actually, in fact, a compelling hero's journey, right? This is something we want to sit down for and kind of eat popcorn to. Like, she wants a man. She is the protagonist in this dynamic of wanting the man. Yeah. We've got a question we've got some appreciation for feminine chaos. I agree, Ricardo. I love feminine chaos. Question from Jenna. Phoebe, will you talk to Dan Savage about the book? Wondering about what you think his reaction will be.
If he wants to talk with me about the book, I would be happy to. What his reaction would be, that's for him to say. I can say that I did go on, I think it was Sex and Politics, to talk sort of about this topic. And we talked about Giselle Pellico, and I was trying to make the case for straight womanhood not being that it's not just about that situation, and basically just effectively like, if you're going to ask straight women how can you be with men considering this and this, you could ask the same question of gay men, and the answer,
Yep.
I think you just have to say because that's who you like. And it's not so like,
Yep.
this is why I feel like the book would sell better in some respect if I was like, this is a men's rights book and it's about how men are so great. Because, there are a lot of men, and I'm sure most of them would want to hear how great they are. It's not about men being great. It's not about men being not great. It's just about this is the reality. Like you say, like the hetero,
Right.
it's just like that is who women like. Even if they suck, that is who women like. Fortunately, they don't all suck.
Right.
So that is me. I am now me here, and now I'm Dan Savage here. I don't know. If Dan Savage wants to talk to me, he knows where I am.
Dan Savage, you know where to find Phoebe. The last thing I want to add in kind of in response to that too, when we talk about like, I think like realism when it comes to sexuality, or realism when it's just like sex realism, gender real, whatever. I think we're also kind of talking about wokeness is a phenomenon that crops up anywhere. Like there's a woke right, there's a woke left. Wokeness is essentially it's almost like, I read a great essay about it being a kind of like a quasi evangelical phenomenon, but it's like becoming aware of a kind of illegible reality that's suddenly made obvious to you, that's suddenly made clear to you, right? You awaken to a kind of subterranean reality that you had not detected before. This is how the red pill kind of manosphere space works. This is how some kind of like anti-woke criticisms of the woke left work, right? Where it's like, oh God, it's not just about the excesses of the left. It's actually about like, and there's a shadowy plot to really put down men. They're really, it's not just about, this, that, and the other. And so this is, I think, why I find your book so wonderfully sane and just such a refreshing read, Phoebe, because you're essentially saying, like, no, like, I'm not trying to actually make the case for how white men have just been dragged through the mud, or men broadly have been dragged through the mud, right? That would be a kind of like woke response to woke, almost, right? You're just trying to say, like, yeah, the reality is some men do suck. Many men don't suck. I desire men. Like, and I love that.
Yeah, I think it is really just about, like, in terms of to situate it, and I think there might be another question or something, but I was going to say that, like, I think there is this this interest in, say, like during the 2010s, in just focusing on the margins, and
Yes.
for fear of microaggressing, always saying, well, you never know, like, pregnant people. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it could be that you have located the one non she her using pregnant individual for however many miles, and you don't want to offend, that type of
Right.
thinking about the world. And I think there's a place for that. There's also a place for just kind of addressing the world as it actually exists. It's always going to be some sort of balance. And
Yeah.
but the reason, the serious point of this book is that I think a feminism of saying just don't date men doesn't actually work. And that needs to be kind of said outright, or else you end up with these extremely silly discussions of, wouldn't it be great if we all lived together in a commune or some sort of female only whatever. And it's like, if women don't actually think this, apart from like 5 women who are already doing that, what are we doing here? That's not
Right.
actually leading to anything productive for feminism.
Absolutely. Um, we'll grab just one more question. Elizabeth has a book recommendation: Swoon, Great Seducers and Why We Love Them. It's a little over a decade old, but it's totally absent paranoia, sex, and romance between men and women. Thank you for the recommendation, Elizabeth. Swoon, Great Seducers and Why We Love Them. But there's one question at the bottom here, Phoebe, I think would be great for you to take a look at. Eamon says, the killer argument in favor of Phoebe's the thesis is that if you apply the all women are bi/queer, whether they realize it or not idea, is that anyone who applied it to men. Okay, I see. So yeah, so Eamon's saying, like, if we apply this kind of like sexual fluidity that we often graft onto women to men, like it's like, oh, men just don't realize that maybe they're a little bit bi, that would really I think step on some toes, to put it lightly. And yeah, that's probably a great thing to address at the very end here, like why that double standard exists.
Sure, sure. I should say also, just one more thing about the female sexual fluidity. It's obviously not great for lesbians. If you're a woman who has said
Yeah,
you only are interested in women, the fact that a researcher
there we
could, like,
go.
find some roundabout way for saying that maybe there's a glimmer of a thought in which you might kind of sort of find a man interest, like, that does not go good places, right? So that's one
No.
issue there. With men, I think it's complicated. I think there's a much stronger and more sort of visceral homophobia that exists, that
Mhm.
makes it such that any man who is somewhere more central in the Kinsey scale, whatever, is going to be less likely to um, just sort of live in the ambiguity. There's also this understanding in the culture of male sexuality as very binary. So the difference, like, you think about just like two standard issue straight couples. In one, the woman says she's bisexual, the man thinks threesomes. The man says he's bisexual, the woman thinks he's leaving with his partner he's been with secretly for 3 decades, and I will never see him again. And that's what he's telling me. And he's just breaking the news slowly. I know that there are bisexual men. I think they have probably been undercounted.
Yes.
I'm not going to give numbers here. I'm not that type of, whatever, but not that kind of girl. But
Not a data scientist.
no,
Not that kind of girl.
but I have known bisexual men. Like they're out there.
Yes, same.
I don't think that that's, yeah, and I think it would be a healthier place as a society if it could be understood that they exist, and conversely, sort of not projected onto all of women that this is some sort of inherent quality of female sexuality. Similarly, it's like the whole thing of people being visual creatures. I think the extent to which women are visual creatures has been understated and underestimated. The
Yeah.
extent to which men are always that way, exclusively that way, always the higher libido, whatever, all of that, like this is why I have a kind of intentionally hyperbolic Substack post called Men and Women Are Exactly the Same. It's not because I think that men and women are exactly the same, but I feel like, especially in these kind of Substack gender wars, you get this overestimation of how different people are. And it's like, we are all just people. And that's the message of my book. It could have been called We Are All Just People, but that might have been too vague. So instead, it's The Last Straight Woman.
If it was called We Were All Just People, though, boy, would it have flown off the shelves in 1976. And you had your kind of like second wave
it was
glory, I know. Phoebe, thank you so much. Thank you for writing this. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Raph. This was amazing. Thank you.
Wonderful conversation. Amazing as well. For me, please, 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 people, buy this book. People, you're all just people. We're all alike, and you're all going to want to read Phoebe's book.
Buy a big stack of them as home decor,
Oh, I love the yellow. Yeah. Thank you for tuning in. This will be actually the post will be live tomorrow morning. So if you want to share it out, that'd be awesome. And look forward to reading more of your writing, Phoebe.
Thank you so much, Raph. This was great.
Bye.